Well, Mayor Matt, or I think you told me to call you Matt. I just want to thank you for being out here with me today and being a part of the Echo family for a few minutes and just kind of pouring some of your thoughts and heart into our community. So appreciate that.
Thanks for having me. I
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to just start by asking you to just tell us a little bit about you. Like you came into a big role, leading one of the largest cities in California, and there's a lot to that. But what are some of the things like in your life that prepared you for the moment you find yourself in right now? Like give us a little bit of a glimpse of who you are.
Yeah, it is a little bit of an overwhelming role, and I'm not sure there's anything that really prepares you for the responsibility and everything that's coming at you all the time in this kind of job. But really, life experiences. My parents' support, the many experiences I've had through life. I've been blessed with incredible diversity of experience. I've worked on family farms in Bolivia doing irrigation systems. Been a public school teacher in Eastside San Jose. I'm a parent, so I know a little bit about what it's like to be responsible for some young lives, and have also worked in tech, which is a big part of our community here. So I think just that diversity of experience is really important. And one of the ones that I draw on the most is actually my time campaigning, where
Mm,
I got some really good advice. Somebody said to me, don't worry about all the interest groups and the fancy cocktail parties and all that stuff. Just go knock on doors.
mm.
And so I spent months just knocking on doors and doing small meet and greets in neighborhoods. And that's given me a certain groundedness and confidence that I have a pretty good sense of what the community thinks and what people want and what their fears and hopes are. And that's kind of been my bedrock in this job for the first 6 months.
That's awesome. In fact, one of your staffers told me this that one of your biggest passions is actually that bridge between the neighborhood and the city council and the government part of life. But talk a little bit about that because that's unique. 'Cause you don't see that every day, But what drove some of that for you?
Yeah, well, I grew up in Watsonville, which is a little farming town. And when I was growing up there in the 80s and 90s, we had a lot of challenges. I was a curious kid, and I grew up reading the local newspaper and really trying to figure out why we had the violence we had and why we had a really high crime rate. We had really high dropout rates in our high school, which is part of the story of how I ended up coming to San Jose. We had high unemployment. We had a lot of challenges, and I guess over time, reading the paper and learning and being curious, I saw government and public policy as one way of solving problems in a big, complex society like the
Mhm.
one we live in. But sadly, when I talk to people, I hear a lot of frustration and a feeling of the opposite of disempowerment.
Mm,
And I guess it just is for me become kind of a mission to want to reduce that gap, as you put it, between the people in our neighborhoods who just we all want a lot of we mostly want the same things. We talk about our quality of life. We want good schools. We want to live in a safe community. We want to have a healthy environment. We want to feel a sense of belonging. And yet far too few people see government as a vehicle for helping to deliver those things. And so I want to show people that really this idea, the inspiration for our country, a government of, by, and for the people, can actually be true in practice, that people can get directly involved, that they can get some of the things that they need through the collective vehicle that government is when it's at its best.
that's awesome. I'm curious of this even from a personal point of view, but we talked about how we're both pretty new in our roles, in just a few less than a year, basically being in this role. And I know this to be true that anytime you step into a leadership role, there's some people that love you and they cheer for you and they applaud you and they're like, "I'm for you," and then there's some people that just don't like you and they will make that very clear. And I think especially honestly in faith in organizations and in government that we have that in common, that people will let you know what they believe or disagree with you on. So tell me a little bit about that for you. Like how do you handle criticism and the people that sometimes come at you and you're trying to do good things, but there's a variety of opinions about the things that you want to accomplish, and how do you handle that as a leader?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'm curious to hear any tips you might have. I'd be interested to hear your perspective on this as well. I'm trying to do a few things. One is I'm really trying very hard to stay focused and not boil the ocean. I,
Hmm.
I think, there are endless needs in society. And if we try to be everything to everyone, I think we're only set up for failure. And so I've tried to come in saying there are a few foundational things that I heard consistently at doors across the city when I was out campaigning. And I want to focus on making sure our community is safe and clean and that people are housed and that we create opportunity. And so those are really my four pillars, if you will, of what I'm focused on. So I try to be honest with people that we can't be everything to everyone, not if we want to see real progress. If there's some things where we agree we really need to move the needle, then we have to focus in. And then that concept of honesty is really important because I actually find that at both extremes, the people who absolutely love you and absolutely hate you, they're both wrong in a way, and that they believe that you have more power or
Hmm.
influence than you really do. Mayor sounds like a big role, so does governor, so does president, but at the end of the day, we live in a very complex ecosystem. And really, what we do collectively matters a lot more than what one elected official does. In fact, even just as the microcosm of that, city of San Jose, every decision around our budget or policy or a city ordinance all requires a majority vote of the council. I don't get to do anything unilaterally. And so sometimes there are people who are overly excited who think I'm going to go change the world overnight and make everything happen. I have to set expectations and say, here's what I'm trying to get done. Here's what's realistic. But there are some very real limitations and barriers, whether resource constraints, legal constraints, whatever it might be. And for those who are dead set against me, I'm also saying, well, here's why I'm trying to do what I'm doing. But I wish I could go faster. I wish we could just wave a magic wand.
Hmm.
But it's so, I guess another way of putting it as a former public school teacher is I think part of the process is going through a journey of learning and educating
That's good.
and trying to actually engage people in authentic conversations about what the real barriers are. What is
Mm.
it? Everybody wants homelessness to just be ended. But we could spend hours talking about the complexity of that issue, why we have homelessness, what it takes to get out of homelessness, what the resources are at our disposal, and how mismatched they are with the need. I mean, there's a lot there. There aren't easy answers, unfortunately, but we live in a world where people expect a 30-second
Yeah,
soundbite. They want the oversimplified, the kind of very simple black and white answer, and it's rarely that way.
that's good.
How about you? What do you do when
Oh
you feel
gosh.
that opposition to what you're trying to get done?
I mean, I like what you said. I think there's like remember why you're doing what you're doing in the first place and prioritizing the main things. And I think finding common ground with people is really important. I know you've been about that too. So there are things that we all agree on that we can focus on that allows us to put our differences aside to accomplish the ultimate goal. And you have to focus on the things that matter most.
Yeah,
So, but even when you do that, sometimes people just don't like it. They let you know and they oppose you.
yeah,
And it's been the history of humanity. Every person that's done great things has had to face opposition and be okay with that for the sake of their
yeah,
conviction.
yeah.
So,
I was just talking with my wife about this because she doesn't like the criticism and the spotlight.
mhm,
And I think part of what I've tried to cultivate over time that has been very difficult but helpful has been not taking things personally and recognizing that we all have a role to play, and I'm trying to change things, and not everyone's going to love that. But when there's criticism, I try to assume the best and that it's not really, I mean, most of the people who are critical on social media don't actually know me, and I feel like if
yeah,
they took the time to, they might have a different opinion. But
yeah,
we may also fundamentally disagree at the level of ideas of what's right, and that's okay. That's part of what a democracy is all about.
yeah, that's good. I'm curious, even on a more personal level, if you don't mind me asking this, like when, we're a faith community and there's a component of our, even as we read the scriptures, and like in Romans chapter 12, 13, 14, it talks a lot about the role of government. And there's a little phrase that says that all authority is established by God. And it calls believers to pray, to support, and submit to authorities. I'm wondering for you, did you sense that, like, is this for you partially a calling as well? Like, do you see your role as through a spiritual lens as well? Like, what part does faith play into what you're doing in your role?
It's a great question. I think on a few levels I do,
Hmm.
and that's not a comfortable thing for everybody to talk about. Obviously,
Yeah,
obviously in our country we talk a lot about separation of church and state,
yeah,
but it wouldn't be true for me to answer any other way, in the sense that going to Catholic schools growing up, social justice was a very big part of what we talked about in my school and in my family, and is a core value of how do we give everyone access and opportunity and allow for human flourishing. At the end of the day, whether it's motivated by faith, which for me, at least in large part, it has been, or not, I think most of us want to see people achieve their full potential. There's something very beautiful in seeing a human being be able to really express
I
their
agree.
talents and serve others. And that idea, certainly for me, came out of the faith tradition in which I was raised. So there's certainly that's a big component of what I get excited about.
Yeah.
So there's certainly that. Also, this sense, and I think this is true to, well, at least what I've read and understood of virtually all faith traditions, is this notion of oneness, of unity, of the, whether it's the concept of the body of Christ in the Christian tradition, or it's, an Eastern religion. You also have this sort of stripping away of the ego and a recognition that there's a holistic, there's a oneness, there's an interconnectedness. That fundamental idea is very powerful, and I actually think there are many trends in our society that work against that notion that we're all interconnected, interdependent.
Mhm.
So there's a religious basis for that, but there's also, I think, in some ways, even just kind of a natural or biological basis. You see that expressed in kind of ecosystems. And so there are a lot of different ways people get to universal truths. But certainly for me, I find those ideas get me, and those values get me excited and bring purpose to the work that I do.
That's good. Okay, so we're in the series called For the Good, and it's for the good of the Bays, the kind of the ethos, the concept that we're in. And I'm wondering for you, like, what is your vision for the domain that you oversee, which is the city of San Jose? Like, when you look at the city and your role in it and what your team's trying to accomplish, you mentioned this a little bit, but like, tell us a little bit about like what do you think is the good that we're trying to accomplish in the city?
That's a great question. To me, a city is a political, economic entity at its best, creates opportunity and upward mobility for everyone. And part of what makes San Jose special is we've been a city that has welcomed people from all over the world and created incredible opportunity, upward mobility, a very high quality of life for what is truly one of the most diverse populations on the planet. There's
Yeah.
something very special about that. And so I see the role of city government and government more broadly as being a platform.
Mm,
I don't believe in a top down, highly centralized form of government where we dictate what the good life is and we tell people, here's how to live your life, and here's what to do, and here's what's good, and here's what's right and wrong. Certainly, we have to have some laws and some rules and certain standards. But really, what is most exciting to me is this idea of us creating a platform,
mm,
creating the infrastructure, roads, bridges, airport, transit, parks, trails, all the physical infrastructure, digital infrastructure, broadband, the conditions of safety, being in a safe community, access to education, healthcare, basic human needs that we all have that in many cases a market may not produce. You may need this vehicle that government represents for collective action to build the road. You're not going to have two companies competing to do it. We as a community say we need that road, and we're going to collectively invest in it. When we get the basics right, when our community is safe, when it's clean, when we build infrastructure, when we educate our population and create access to resources, that's when the actual magic starts,
mm.
which is the human spark of creativity. The artist, the entrepreneur, the parent, the whomever it is, people know what to do from there. I mean, humans at their best, when the basics are taken care of, are capable of immense creativity
Yeah.
and beauty. And that's really what I think our role is right now. San Jose, because of slow permitting processes, struggling to manage growth, struggling to help people deal with addiction, not doing a good enough job of educating our young people, we're holding ourselves back. We are holding back that human flourishing, that opportunity for people to achieve their full potential. So that's my vision for San Jose, as a city that gives every person, especially every young person in our city, the opportunity to become their kind of fullest expression of who they are. And a lot of that, I think, getting back to a religious perspective, is serving others. I think our greatest satisfaction comes in developing our own skills and knowledge and creativity, and then being able to turn and contribute that to the benefit of others, which then comes back to us because we're interconnected.
Yeah.
So that's sort of how I think about in the larger concept of what our role is that platform, that foundation.
That's good. So what's the role of the church in all of that? Like, we talk about domains, like there's
Yeah,
education and, government and
yeah,
technology and all this stuff. And then there's the communities of faith.
yeah.
And not just Christian faith, but even just communities of faith in general. Like, what's your perspective there of like how can we be a bigger part in the transformation of our cities?
I think there are a lot of different levels on which we can answer that question. One, very foundationally, is that I think faith traditions are often different paths to the same universal truths about what is true, how to live if you want to lead a full and happy life,
Mhm.
how to live in community, how to work with others and live with others in a way that is as kind of affirming and fulfilling as possible. So that's religious traditions, faith traditions offer a substantive answer to that question that I don't think government should try to answer, which is what is
Mm.
the right way to live your life? What
Mm.
is the good life? That's for the individual to determine, often through a tradition, through a community, often through a faith tradition. That's an individual choice and journey, but it's so often not really at the end of the day individual. It happens through community and through tradition and ritual and practice. So um, on one level, I think it's very fundamentally it answers questions of the eternal questions of kind of how to be happy, how to be fulfilled, how to live in community with others. That's something you're not going to get from a city council meeting.
Yep.
We're not going to tell you how to be happy or how to live in community with others. So that's an important role at a very foundational level. At the level of solving societal problems, our faith communities do tremendous work in serving the poor, helping with our unhoused community, providing essential social services, food distribution, health and dental care. We see part of the collective action, the expression of faith for many communities ends up being through this service to others. And that's hugely important because even with all the resources and authority that government has, there's always far more need than we have the capacity
Yeah.
to really address. So I think there are different levels on which faith communities contribute to the community.
That's good. You know, when I moved here to the Bay Area, one of the things that stood out to me was even in comparison to other parts of the country, is it felt to me like the church here um, didn't quite have the kind of reputation that it might have in different parts of the country or even in the world. I'm from Brazil originally, and
Hmm.
growing up in a place where uh, there's sometimes more respect even for faith communities. Not
Yeah.
always, but sometimes. And but here it felt like sometimes there's an image that people have of the church that's not always very positive. Have you seen that in the Bay
Yeah.
Area? Like
Yeah.
what, even in, I think you've been in education, tech, and government now. What have you sensed is the perspective of people in our communities here toward the church, just very honestly?
Yeah, I think your perception of that is correct. I think there are probably a few reasons for it, and I'm not sure I have the answer to this observation that
Yeah.
you've had. But my hypothesis would be a few things. One is just as a center for technology and innovation,
Hmm.
I think there are many of us, and I frankly struggle with this myself, who struggle to reconcile a very rationalist modern world that has a real rooting in sort of a scientific method in which you must be able to directly observe and measure something. The methodology of technology of science is one that requires direct observation and measurement. Faith is just a foreign concept in that world.
Yeah.
And so I think part of what you have is that culture clash, the traditional going back to Galileo and before of just faith and science struggling to figure out where they connect. So that's one source of tension I think that is very present here. I also think, and I think it's related maybe to that science-based mindset that's so prevalent in the Bay Area is just that there's a very strong libertarian strand in political thought here as well. Even though when you look at how people vote, it's overwhelmingly Democratic. There's a very strong individualist undercurrent. I
Mm,
actually believe that's part of our challenge with homelessness in our community is that we have maybe misinterpreted the concept of civil liberties into beginning to allow folks to just sort of live however they want and die on the streets. And that's kind of their choice, even when someone's trapped in a cycle of addiction or a serious mental illness and actually needs intervention. But we're very uncomfortable with telling someone what to do.
yep.
We're about voluntarily, it's your autonomy, your agency. And on one level, I think autonomy and agency is the goal. It's great, but there are limitations. There is no kind of absolute value around that when somebody's really suffering. So I think that there are in our kind of political and cultural traditions here some real conflict with the ideas of faith and a higher moral authority and many of the other foundational concepts in our faith traditions. And there's a
Yeah.
culture clash, frankly.
Yeah.
I think it's hard, and it's hard to reconcile. It's very hard to reconcile those.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're even being a little kind toward the church right now, because I think a big part of it, if I'm honest too, like it is, I feel like often the church has been more about words than action, and sometimes um, not quite getting our hands dirty and doing something. Even historically, like when you look at the last several centuries, churches are the ones that started hospitals and
Right.
almost every
Right.
initiative to change homelessness and help take care of the poor. And I think that in some ways we've lost some of um, our mentality and our drive and our value to get our hands dirty. And instead of being a community that is for the city, we've kind of become more about us. So it's part of what we're doing today, right?
Yeah.
And I'm actually even curious for you, like, I want to ask you this, like, if you could give us a challenge as a community of faith, and you look at, where one of our core values is to be for the city, to support, everything that's good that's happening in our community, and to be the kind of people that even Jesus described as people of light, that when you
Yeah.
go, there's light that follows you. What's your encouragement for us? We've been trying to, we started at Echo Compassion. We support all these different organizations that do good, and we ask our people to volunteer and to get active. But from your point of view, what should we do more of? And if you could have a few minutes to just like speak into the Echo community and call us to a
Hmm.
different level of engagement toward the city, what's your word for us?
Wow, that's no pressure.
No
That's a
pressure.
good one. Yeah. Well, first, let me say I really appreciate that you're talking about acts, not just words,
Yeah.
and that faith needs to be expressed through action and through serving others. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's very powerful, and I do think there's been this sort of retreat from
Mm-hmm.
society at times. So I think that's really powerful, and I'm glad that you're thinking about it that way. One thing would say that may sound almost too obvious is that I'm really trying to encourage everyone in San Jose to get out and meet their neighbors.
Love
And
that.
that I know
Yeah.
sounds obvious and maybe when you actually think about doing it in practice a little odd. Are you really going to just go knock on your neighbor's door? But yes, I mean, I think you can get to know your neighbors and reach out. There's a woman on my cul-de-sac named Cindy. I hope she doesn't mind me sharing this, but she has some training in emergency preparedness and she's sort of like the mayor of our cul-de-sac. She
Mhm.
knows everyone on the street. She has everyone's contact information. Whenever a new person moves in, she throws a little potluck and invites all the neighbors. She knows, if there was an emergency, she'd be the one who would, if we had an earthquake, she'd be out there saying, okay, that house has, two kids and three cats. Let's make sure they're all safe, and she knows what to do. And she has taken it upon herself to be the connector in our
Mm.
neighborhood. And I think that we've become very isolated. And I think thankfully our faith communities are still a source of connection and belonging and
Yeah.
are a counter trend. But maybe you can share that sense of community and connection with others who may not be people of faith,
Yeah.
who may have a different faith tradition, who may be agnostic or atheist or whatever it might be. We have lost that sense of community in our neighborhoods. And we know the research is very clear that we know we're facing an epidemic of loneliness in
Yeah.
this country. People feel isolated, often feel very fearful. And the opposite is also true. When we make that very uncomfortable effort to get out and get to know our neighbors and ask how we can help each other. It could be as easy as starting with an emergency preparedness list. That's a good excuse for getting to know all your neighbors, is compiling everybody's phone numbers in case of an emergency and making sure everybody knows what to do if an earthquake hits. Could be a good excuse. But we know that when neighborhoods are connected and people are on a first name basis with their neighbors, we actually get better outcomes.
Yeah.
Neighborhoods are suddenly, almost magically, they're safer, people are healthier, people are happier. You actually get better human outcomes when people are connected. And so, yes, serve at the soup kitchen and help us with housing the homeless and then all these other great programs. But I think what we most lack is at the fundamental level is that sense of human connection and trust. And maybe the operative word here is love. I know that's
Yeah.
really uncomfortable. We don't really talk about that in public policy so much, but fundamentally, I think we all yearn for more of that. So I think everybody here has an opportunity to go be that force of love and connection right there, starting with the person who lives right next door to you.
Yeah. That's awesome. Well said. I think that's a great call for our church. And even I totally agree with you, by the way. I think if there's one of the main phrases that every religious group accepts about Jesus that he taught was to treat your neighbor as yourself, to love your neighbor. And I think that the people of faith are the ones that should model that the most in a city. And we have a call to that. You know, our very God has called us to be the kind of people that know our neighbor, that love our neighbors. And man, it is a global pandemic right now of isolation, and people don't know how to look each other in the eye.
Yeah.
And so we're actually calling our whole community in the coming months to start what we call table groups. And it's an opportunity to open your dinner table to those in your community and in your workplaces to just come and explore God, explore meaning of life together around a meal. And I think it's a big part because of that is just teaching us again how to relate with one another in love.
Yeah,
So
that's
thank you for those
beautiful.
words.
No, thank you.
Yeah. How can we pray for you? You know, you got a big job. You got a lot going on. You still have a long, time doing this, but what are some ways that we as a community can be praying for you and supporting you?
Oh, there's so many things I need help with. My biggest challenge right now is finding the balance between my day job, which can be all consuming,
Uh-huh.
and as I'm sure yours is, and finding time for my family and close friends. And I feel like it's often my wife and kids who end up on the short end of that deal on a day-to-day basis. And so I'm
Yeah.
trying to find a better balance. So I think remembering and keeping in perspective what's really important
Hmm.
is certainly something I would ask for your prayers for. And then just
Yeah.
more generally, it takes more time and effort to really be honest with the community about the complexity of the issues we face. And so I would ask for the community's patience and willingness to ask questions and to learn, because most of these issues are actually quite complex. And I wish they were simpler. People want easy answers. But unfortunately, if it was easy, we would have already solved it, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, there's a
Totally
couple of
agree.
thoughts.
Well, we're very grateful for you, Mayor. And I'm even personally, when I first got to see you last year and hear some of the things that you're trying to accomplish, my heart was was filled with gratitude for you. I know you have a hard job, and we're here to support you and those in your team that are trying to do good in our city. And really, really grateful for your efforts in doing all of that, even
Thank you.
facing opposition at times.
Yeah, no, thank you. I
Yeah,
really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you and everything that you and the church are doing. Thank you.
awesome.